homes, the East Midlands is facing one of the most severe shortages of housing in the country. So what's being done to tackle it, and do any of the political parties have the right policies? Tim Parker has been to a new development that's hoping to provide more affordable homes in Leicestershire.
This award-winning housing scheme in Colville is the latest collaboration between East Midlands Housing and North West Leicestershire District Council to get more affordable homes built where we live.
This is a really good example of where we've worked in partnership with North West Leicestershire District Council to take a site that had a really derelict old pub on it, and we've transformed that into the really amazing scheme you can see behind you today.
Next in line for redevelopment is the Pick and Shovel pub, and the development is badly needed.
We've got a waiting list of between 600 and 700 people at any one time, and we get about 300 vacancies a year. But what we can do about it is assist in schemes like this, and having got our own housing stock in good condition and having got our finances in good condition, we can now look to our options for providing new houses.
So you're not ruling out building homes yourself then?
Not at all. That's an aspiration, as it would be for any social landlord, yes.
Despite house prices in the East Midlands being below the national average, they're still around 7 times the average salary for the region. Which means the queue for a bus in Colville is a lot shorter than the queue to get on the property ladder.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I was very, very lucky when I got my house the first time round. If it wasn't through help from my parents and the unfortunate death of a grandparent, I would have been absolutely nowhere near being able to put a deposit down on a house.
I'm aware that young people are having to sort of save and save and save at the moment and put down ridiculous deposits.
It's not affordable, I can't afford it, but I have to do it.
East Midlands Housing is aiming to build 300 homes like this a year, but it's nowhere near what's needed.
Well, Kate Faulkner, a property expert who's been researching the housing policy of all the main parties, has joined us in the studio. How bad is the housing problem in the East Midlands, Kate?
Well, actually, we're quite lucky. We've got less of a problem than most other cities in the country. But if you kind of break down the sector into 3 parts, you've got your private sector, which is the homes that are existing and new builds, and you've got the rental sector. You then have affordable homes, which is somebody that can get on the ladder but maybe not buy the whole of the property. And then you have the social sector, where the real crisis is everywhere, including in the East Midlands, is the affordable and the social sector. We just aren't providing homes for socially vulnerable and low-paid workers at anything like the requirement that's needed.
So that is the real problem, isn't it?
That
the affordable
is the
housing. And we fall
problem.
really behind, don't we, compared to the rest of the country on that?
Well, it's horrendous, and you've got things like we've got about 1,000 properties maybe built by housing associations, but then we sold 1,000 off under right to buy, and that does seem a little crazy, really, from a policy perspective. The big thing is that we're not building enough homes altogether, so we need something like 25,000 homes a year. We did just over 8, and we have to get better. We haven't got the excuse they have elsewhere. East Midlands has plenty of land, even just looking around the BBC studios, loads of land around here, and we need to get building, and we need to be excited about what we can do in this area.
You've been looking at the policies of the main parties on housing. Do any of them have the right approach?
I think the idea, it's good that certainly the Liberals and certainly the Labour Party have actually put targets, and if you're going to get out of any crisis, you've got to have targets to get. Disappointing the Conservatives haven't got a new build target for us yet. I hope that will come. But where I think the other policies are, and the private rental sector is a big growth sector at the moment. And I think from the coalition side and in the future, they are looking at things like build to rent. And self-build. One of the reasons we have less stock than most other countries is we don't self-build, and we have very little what we call institutional investment, which might be 200 properties built that are then rented out and can be rented out to the long term because they're not an individual buy-to-let investor.
Well, let's see what the politicians think about your review of their policies. Basically, Kate says you're not gone far enough. Where are your policies? Where do you stand on this, and why haven't you got any?
Well, I think we've actually done really well under the coalition government in terms of moving things forward, certainly in terms of helping get people onto the housing ladder.
But that's not what Kate's saying, is it?
Well, Kate might not be saying that, but we've got some really good examples, and I'll happily take her to them in Erewash, where, and I've been able to bring the Prime Minister and show him developments where first-time buyers have been able to get onto the property market for the same for the first time. You know, it's not a new problem, and the thing with improving housing, these things do take they do take a long time. It's not an excuse, that's a fact, that would count for.
But in the meantime, we've got all these people waiting on waiting lists,
and it's not just first-time buyers. This is where actually the private sector market in the East Midlands area works pretty well. What doesn't work is you've got 100,000 people on council waiting lists. What are we doing? Where's the target to get that down?
And Kate also said, Chris, that Labour has got some good ideas, but capping private rents, for example, won't work.
Well, I mean, I think our commitment to build around 1 million homes in the lifetime of the next Parliament is absolutely vital. Supply of housing is key to the housing crisis that we're living through at the moment. We're building less houses now than we've built since the 1920s. But I think it's also really essential that we address the problems in the private rented sector. In my view, the private rented sector has no place providing, if you like, social housing. That should be a role for local authorities and housing associations. I'm not saying the private sector hasn't got a role at all, but where it should be providing housing is for people who are not on the kind of low incomes, as it were. But I think it's also essential that there is some regulation brought into the private rented sector, so that, as we've said, that we will look to cap excessive rent rises. We'll tackle the rogue letting agents who are ripping off tenants left, right and centre, and we'll build in some long-term tenancy so that you can actually enable people to put down roots.
Well, okay, so long-term tenancy agreements, any landlord wants those. It is a myth that this is a good thing for tenants, because the majority of tenants want short-term. There are some families now who are going into longer-term tenancies. They are best served by institutional investment, which is built to rent. And the problem is if you introduce rent controls, just like in the late 60s, they disappear. That's one of the main reasons we are so short of stock in this country.
But the difference,
the
difference in terms of the 1960s, of course, is that we were building around 300,000 homes a year at that time, and whilst the private rented sector did play a role, it didn't actually provide housing for people on very low incomes. And I would love to get back to that situation where you've got local authorities, housing associations providing homes for people on modest and low incomes, and the private rented sector, dealing with a niche market that it deals.
So what do you want our MPs to do then, Kate? What should they be doing?
What I want is you to come up with great policies for the public to choose from, and to make sure that they can get a roof over their head, whichever of the sectors they fit into. And at the moment, you're concentrating on the private rental sector. The idea of introducing rent controls will be a disaster.
I don't think we are concentrating on the private sector. With respect, we've talked about building up to 1 million homes in the lifetime of the next.
That is actually planning to fail.
But it's a massive improvement on where we are. It's a massive improvement where we are now.
It doesn't matter. That's exactly.
Well, I think it does matter because we're building fewer homes than we've built since the 1920s.
It doesn't matter. You've got to be more ambitious. You're basically saying to the public, we're not going to build enough to put a roof over everybody's heads.
What we're saying is that we're going to increase house building by 200,000 a year.
Yeah, but it's not enough. There's 250,000 new households every year.
200,000 or 100,000 more than the building at the moment.
But that's just because we've had a recession. So now that we're out of that recession, that will have happened in the past.
It's clearly a very contentious issue, one that we need more clarity on. What's the situation where you are in Erewash?
Well, the situation where we are, we've actually had, as I say, quite a bit of investment, and we've had new builds, and I was checking with the Borough Council as well. They've got good figures over the year 13 to 14 about getting people who have been disabled into new homes and so on. We have got some really good examples of that. I think you're right. I mean, I think a key change that's happened under this government is been the localism bill. I think that's really helped. I think that decisions made about housing, I don't agree with these top-down decisions. I think locally it's much better to give people choice and opportunity and let local communities, through their representatives, make those decisions.
But we're still not building
enough. You don't look convinced, I have to say. Are you heartened or more worried about what you've heard in the studio?
Well, the problem is, with the localism side, is that the way we work at the moment is we kind of dump planning permission or planning applications onto people's doorsteps, which if you're living across a field, you're automatically going to object to. One of the major problems that we have in creating new build homes is the huge delay because of objections coming through. So what there is no policy for is, or area for is how to tackle NIMBYism, for example, and how to get the local communities to work much closer together.
And you want every single MP to address this issue, don't you?
I do. I want every MP to lay out and say, this many people in temporary housing, this many people in the council waiting list. We will reduce it to this. We know there are this many first-time buyers in our area. This is what we're going to do to get them on the housing ladders. Absolutely, and to know their numbers. Very few people, and I'm afraid that applies to MPs as well, understand what housing actually costs in their area, what's actually happening to rents. For example, private rents have gone up 5% in 10 years.
Thanks very much indeed.